systems engaged, frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thanks for joining us. Yesterday saw us release the Robots Remastered version of my chat with writer Josh Dysart from back in April of 2020, where we talked about his new book Goodnight Paradise and his run on Vertigo's Unknown Soldier and his career in general before taking a turn towards Jackie Chan as an outlet for joy in those pandemic times. A good conversation made a little tighter, it sounded a little better, perfect for a re-listen or discovering for the first time. Whichever you happen to do will be a wonderful lead into today's episode, where Josh is back on the show to talk about his new horror miniseries from Bad Idea called The HAB, with David Lapham and Bill Sienkiewicz. Printed on old-school newsprint-esque paper, The HAB shows us all what happens when a billionaire and his circle of family and staff survive a nuclear holocaust in his high-tech bunker, only to find a worse fate waiting for them. Find out how this something-for-everyone horror story fits in today's climate, where billionaire Tuttle Barrows sits on the continuum of characters from Josh's career to this point, horror's necessity as a genre, how all these production pieces fit together, why letterers should be valued more across the board, and what Hong Kong action pillar gets another off-the-cuff watch guide from Josh himself. So, just sit back, relax, and enjoy my catching-up chat with writer Josh Dysart. My guest today is back on the show after almost 6 years. That earlier conversation from April of 2020 has been remastered and is up on the show feed to be enjoyed again or discovered for the first time. And I highly recommend you do so because, my rambling aside, it is a great look into his writing career in comics up to that point. We talk about his two collaborations with artist Alberto Ponticelli, Vertigo's Unknown Soldier, and his then current book Goodnight Paradise from TKO Studios. We talk about how his career zigs when others zag, his need to find truth and to put truth on the page as much as possible while embracing genre, his travels around the world in search of that truth, his love for Jackie Chan and Hong Kong cinema. It's a good one, folks. Trust me. It's also a talk that takes place just as Bad Idea was starting to put out comics, and his being one of their first. He's back on the show today to talk about his third Bad Idea release, a 5-issue horror miniseries called The HAB, pairing him up with the artistic crew of David Lapham and Bill Sienkiewicz. It's a haunted house comic for the 21st century, and it's got all the hallmarks of a strong Josh Dysart comic, which is a stroke of luck because it is Josh Dysart who's joining me to talk about it today. Josh, how are you doing?
Hey, I ripped that Josh Dysart guy off when I wrote The HAB. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go
He's
for
another
Josh
influence.
Dysart
He's a
vibe.
very strong
He's a big-
influence.
Yes. Yeah. Hard to shake, actually. That
Yeah.
influence.
Well, good. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad to have you back.
Thanks for
Again,
having me.
6 years. It was a really good conversation in terms of what we covered. We talked about your Vertigo stuff, some of the other things that went on in your career. If there's a question that people want to find out about that we don't cover in this interview, go back and listen to that one. Chances are we covered it there. We actually talked about your Swamp Thing stuff even more specifically at Baltimore Comic-Con, like 15 or 16, 17, somewhere around there. Right after Len Wein passed, you were at the show. And I was like, look, Swamp Thing was a big thing in your life. We need to, we need to talk about this. So actually there are 2 Josh Dysart episodes in the archive that is free over at robotsfromtomorrow.net or the
That's
podcast
a lot of Josh
feed.
Dysart.
That is,
Don't
it's all good.
overdose.
It's
Is it?
good.
Oh,
Well,
good. Thank God.
yeah. It is a fun listen.
Cool.
So 6 years ago, Bad Idea was just getting started. Walk me through how you got from there to the HAB.
Well, the 6 years since we last talked has been approximately 12 years, right? We've had the pandemic. We've had it's been a very long 6 years. This whole time I've been working for Bad Idea. It's funny when you say this is my third release for them. It technically is, but I've also been doing all kinds of odds and ends and shorts and stuff. In fact, I started writing The HAB. It's funny we spoke in 2020 because at that point, let's see, I started writing the HAB in like 2022. So everyone's got a different date from me on when I started writing it. I know that I started thinking about the pitch in 2018, but I
Hmm.
definitely wrote it like it was my pandemic book. And I think that when I tell people that, and then they look at a lot of the themes of the book, they can see it. Like it becomes
Hmm.
obvious, they're stuck inside, they're afraid of something that's invisible, they don't know how to handle it. The powers that be are not necessarily the most competent at dealing with it. A lot of what I had to say and experience during the pandemic is in the book. But how we got
Hmm.
from there to here, I just kept plugging away and making my comics for Bad Idea. I had not necessarily an exclusive, but I did have a certain amount of work that I needed to get done to
Hmm.
vest with the company. So I have a
Hmm.
vested interest in the company. So that's what I did. Since we talked last, Odin's Eye and Orc Island have come out. So time. It's confusing to me, but I was definitely working. Again, you mentioned Alberto Ponticelli. He and I did Orc Island together, like another collab for us. So we've been
Hmm.
working together since 2007. I got to work with Tomas Chiarello on Odin's Eye, probably one of the best illustrators in the world. And now we're at the HAB, which is a long time coming and getting
Hmm.
published, to be honest.
You had mentioned in an interview that you had written the scripts for the HAB before you knew Lapham and Sienkiewicz and I guess uh
Jay Phillips.
Phillips. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like,
Yeah.
Josh, no, Jason, no, Jacob. That's it. Yeah, third
Yeah.
time's charm. Um,
He's a genius.
when those names were attached, what does that change for you in terms of you working on the book? Because I mean, it's not like you wrote the scripts and then they're there and they're being worked on and you're hands off. Like you're still part of that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. To this day, we're lettering and yeah. Which makes that page rate pretty frustrating. When
Yeah,
years later you're still working on it and you've been
yeah.
paid.
What does that collaboration look like when you're not working with them to form the idea, but you're working with them to make this idea work for them as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that
Yeah.
like?
I will say each artist came in at a different time. So they sort of
Hmm.
dripped in. And so I did, you're correct. I definitely wrote these scripts before we knew who the artist was, which was frustrating. And what I did was I wrote in the scripting style that I had previously done with Alberto Ponticelli on Orc Island, which
Hmm.
was some people have tried to make it sound like it's like a screenplay format. It's not really because it's still moments. I'm not implying motion or sound. And then some people also say it's a Marvel method, but it's a lot more detailed than that. But what it
Hmm.
is I get rid of all panel breaks and all page breaks, although there are page suggestions. So I'll be like, this sequence has to occur between page 1 and 5, for
Hmm.
instance. And then I almost, because I know Alberto so well, I overshare. I'm like, these are all the things I'm thinking about in the case
Hmm.
of Orc Island is like the orc's armor is built from this tree, a bunch of shit you can never draw. And one thing, never put anything in a script that can't be drawn.
Hmm.
Personally, when I have a very close relationship with an artist, putting things in a script that can't be drawn is exciting because it forces them to think about visual representation, and a lot of things can be submerged. And a lot of it is I'm communicating with someone who's a close friend and we're having a good time making comics, right? And so you put a bunch of detail in there and you're like, throw out what you don't want, structure it however you want. And I really felt that Alberto and I made in Orc Island something purely comics, like not a Josh Dysart, Alberto Ponticelli comic, not an Alberto Ponticelli, Josh Dysart comic, but something that was truly a synthetic experience that got closer to making comics than I had really previously. And I'd wanted to work that way for a long time, but many editors, especially on monthly books,
Hmm.
many editors really want the full script, right? Page one, panel one, no, 5 panels, panel one, text,
Hmm.
etc. And I know why we do that on monthly comics. I completely understand. We're in the crunch, we're in the move. I think I'm pretty good at page layout and visualizing the page. So that's a lot of work the artist doesn't have to do. And when you're really on the move in a monthly book, which is a huge grind, that helps a lot. Another reason why editors don't like it is storytelling, visual storytelling from panel to panel is not
Hmm.
every artist's sharpest tool,
Right.
and there's a lot of tools a comic book artist needs more so than almost any other kind of illustrative gig. A lot of times people are afraid that maybe the storytelling is not going to come out as clean as you would like if you're not all working together to make sure the storytelling is clean. But I know with Alberto that I'm in good hands. And so I had written like that, not because I thought Alberto was going to draw it, but because it was a deeply personal comic. I wanted it to be super dense and really, really interesting and do a lot of different things and constantly turning in on itself and always being surprising. And I just thought I would write it this way. And then when the artists came on board, I would go back and I would rewrite the scripts in a more traditional breakdown. That was always my intention. I assumed I was going to throw out probably 25% of what I had written so that it could be a cleaner, easier to consume, and easier to draw series. One thing about this series is a lot is happening internally in the characters that isn't expressed externally. That's a very hard thing to do in comic books. Comics can do anything, but it's one of the harder things to do. So I thought I'd probably lose a lot of that, illuminate it more clearly, just make things a little bit, make the themes pop a little more. And then it took a little while. There was all kinds of external events that occurred that kept us from getting the book done. But then when it came time to draw it, David Lapham had said yes, which was a name that we tossed around. When that happened, I was ecstatic because I've never worked with David before this moment, but I have unflinching faith in his ability to tell panel to panel stories.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like maybe the best in the business, and unflinching faith in his acting, in his character expressions. I'd never thought about it until I began poring over the pages for lettering, but now I know he's like one of the best set designers and stagers in the business. Like a character is where they are in space and time always. They never move around. Furniture is where it's meant to be always. It's incredible, his visual storytelling. And so once he came on board, I didn't touch those scripts. He read the first script, and then I was like, David, I'll rewrite this. It was always my intention to rewrite this. I don't mind rewriting it. And he was like, no, this is it. I like this. This is cool. I can do whatever I want. I can include stuff. I can exclude stuff. You know, if there's something that has to be in there, I notate it. But there's a lot that doesn't have to be in there. That's just like, this is the vibe. This is the thing. This is who they are, you know? So that was really, really exciting. Sienkiewicz came on much, much later in the process. And I knew we were cool in that regard because David did all the breakdowns for Sienkiewicz. So David is still in charge of the storytelling, more or less. He's directing Sienkiewicz. I will say Sienkiewicz does what he wants to do. You know what I mean? So he's still Sienkiewicz, right?
Yeah,
so
like him, Klaus Janson, Kevin Nolan, you give it to them and they're going to make it their own in a way that nobody else does. And that's great. Like that's what you want them to do. But yeah,
yes,
you're like,
exactly.
Bill Sienkiewicz is going to look like
Why are you
Bill
hiring these guys?
Yeah.
I think Duncan Fregado is like that as well. You know, why do you hire these guys if you don't want that? So that was like going to school for one thing, was looking at David's layouts and then looking at Sienkiewicz's finals, what he chose to incorporate and what he chose, where he chose to, you know, do his own thing. So that was super fascinating process of looking at those pages. So in that instance, we were also safe because Bill was reading the scripts, but he wasn't having to make the choices that the script demands of the artist. I mean, he could, you know, I mean, there are definitely panels where he just was like, I'm doing my thing, you know. And then Jacob Phillips was the last artist to come on board very near the end of the process. And I love those Jacob Phillips pages. I love his coloring. And I honestly haven't had any communication with him. But I mean, it's so awesome. And I have no idea what he thinks about the scripts or anything. I mean, at that point, we were so deep in the heart of making the book. And his sequence is short. I would have happily rewritten it for him, but it kind of happened without me even being aware that he was involved, and didn't hear about it till later.
Yeah. It's short. I would have been surprised to hear that David didn't lay that out as well, because it feels very cohesive. And it wasn't like I had to look and see, like, okay, well, I know Jacob's in here somewhere. Where is he? Oh, okay. It's got to kind of be here. And then once you sort of look for it, then you can see the non-Lapham of it.
It's in the inking. It's in the brushstrokes. And I think you might be right. I think Bad Ideas production team was getting choices made at that point while I was working on other stuff. So that might be the case. I don't know. I don't want to assign credit where credit's not due, but that might have been the case. It does seem like that, right? Like it's like there are these other artists, but it still feels like a Lapham book. You know, and how controlled the storytelling is. And I will say this as a side note, we're printing on this really classic old newspaper.
Yes.
Paper. I had no idea, you know, how that was going to feel. I think it looks fantastic with the coloring. And by the way, our two colors, Matt Hollingsworth and Crabtree,
Hmm.
Hollingsworth and Crabtree are geniuses. But I didn't know what the newspaper vibe was going to look like. You spend the whole production working on computer screens, and everything is so vibrant and so bright and alive.
Hmm.
And then, I was like, I don't know. I hope this translates well to the newspaper print. I hope we understand how to mix the values so that they come out better. And I will say everything looks fantastic. I thought the Sienkiewicz pages looked awesome
Yeah.
on that paper. I thought the Lapham pages looked awesome. I do feel like Jacob Phillips' coloring gets a little darker than I would have liked. If you could see those pages on the screen, the blues and the yellows and the oranges are so beautiful, which is great because they're supposed to be like in the Ionians off the coast of Greece, right? So it's supposed to be sun
Hmm.
kissed. But otherwise, really, really great. But he's such a great colorist, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it looks and I'm looking at it right now. Not just the choices, but the geometric application of color, right? So it's not
Yeah.
just
Oh,
the
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
but his not layering, but that abstract, like in the back of 50s cartoons where they would
Mhm.
have really abstract things that are just squares and rectangles and lines and
Yes.
whatever. It's layered on here in a way that feels very totally different because this is a flashback, right? So this is a couple
Yeah.
years before the thing.
Mhm.
Instead of, oh, we're going to have this be sepia and that's how people will know it's a flashback, he's able to use the different application of color, gives it that different feel while still being able to use color in a way that lets it feel natural. So it's
Yeah.
almost like it's kind of subconscious. Well, it starts off with a panel that says 3 years earlier, so it's not exactly subconscious. There's just enough of a shift in it to let you know that this is a different time and place, but it still feels of a piece with what's before and then what's after. It's really an interesting way to stitch together different pieces into something that feels very cohesive. So you've got three different things, but they feel separate and of a piece at the same time, which sounds like that would be really hard to do.
So when I was at Valiant, we used to mix artists in the same issue all the time. And
Hmm.
to be honest, that was very, very often a pragmatic choice that had to be made because we were on a monthly schedule. We were overworked. We were very often working with artists who were the best in the business, but also maybe traditionally not always on monthly books because of the speed at which they worked.
Hmm.
Is a kind way to put it. And so I got in the habit of trying to figure out, assuming I had enough notice, trying to
Hmm.
figure out how to justify the artist change. And it's
Hmm.
something that I started to really enjoy. Like it was really cool to have three world-class artists on one book, precisely
Hmm.
because it does allow us, if we remove ourselves from the narrative aspects of it and we just look at it formally, it's really exciting to see these different artists doing their thing in one book. And so that was something I thought about a lot. So in the HAB, it's a lot more, I wish I could say it's 100% meditated on. And there are a few choices that were made for pragmatism, but I really like the idea of using different artists for different sections so that we get a different vibe from each thing. So it's a lot more carefully thought out.
Yeah. Good job, I guess is
Thanks.
if I
So
sum
far,
up for
so
that.
good.
You, the entire team. This is your third book with Bad Idea, which means you keep coming back to Dinesh and Warren and the crew as publishing partners. This is a home for you. I have to ask, how did Bad Ideas, let's say, deliberate publishing practices sit with your impulse as a creator to try and make your work as accessible to readers as possible? And I mean, like literally accessible, not in terms of like tone or story or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no digital, there's no trades for your like
Right.
earlier work.
Not for me. Yeah.
Right.
There's no trades of mine. Yeah.
If you could walk me through the calculus that goes on in your head as a creator, because you knew that sort of going into it, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, well, yes, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, going in, it was a very different time
Hmm.
and I definitely trusted everybody. I still trust everybody. Warren is on the board, but he's not really actively helping us make the comics anymore. And I trust all the team members, and marketing and building a company is not my skill set at all. It's just not something I know how to do. It's not something I'm super interested in learning how to do. I just like making my comics. So going in, I very much there were a lot of concepts, and maybe we talked about this in 2020, I don't know, but there was a lot of concepts that I was hesitant about and
Hmm.
cautious about. I saw the kind of like, for lack of a better term, the sort of like fuck you attitude, or like I would say it's more like Warholian pop,
Yeah.
like pop
Like
advertising.
iconoclastic sort of
Mhm. Yeah,
impulse.
yeah, and I appreciate all that stuff because
Hmm.
I'm in my heart, I'm an anarchist, right? So it's like
Right.
burn it all down, fuck them, right?
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
also somebody who, who like all writers feel, except for maybe Stephen King, feels underread. I had qualms about it going in, but I trusted the team and I liked working with the team. At that point, I'd worked with them. I think by the time we were really talking about this, I'd been working with them for like 10 years, And then when we got into the nuts and bolts of it, a few things happened. One, the pandemic ostensibly ended. I have various opinions on that, but we won't talk about it here. But ostensibly it ended, and then the boom that we had experienced during the lockdown went
Hmm.
away, and the industry crashed.
Hmm.
So that was an external force that really impacted how we did things, and is one of the reasons why the HAB took so long to come out. Because if we had published when we were ready to publish the HAB, it would have been like throwing it into a dark well. No
Hmm.
one would have read it. We wouldn't have gotten any numbers on it. So the pop Warholian gimmicks combined with the external market forces made things really difficult for me. And, there was a certain amount of work I had to turn in for Bad Idea before I could vest in the company. And I do believe in the company. I do believe in the
Hmm.
people who lead that company. They've definitely, I mean, in the case of our CEO, Dinesh Shamdasani, he's pulled this off before, and few in comics have. So I believe in that.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to be invested, and I still do. And so that's why I was kind of in this relationship with them. I do feel underread. I do feel like my previous books are pretty much invisible to the market. It is an issue, between me and the publisher, which, I love the publisher. I love everybody involved. I'm very hesitant to talk bad about them because they're my friends and I care about them. And I'll be really honest, the truth is the success of this book. So we've had very successful numbers. This has been probably the third most successful launch of my career. And to be
Hmm.
frank, at a time when the market is not, you know what I mean? Like my other successes were at times when the market was thriving. I wouldn't call this market a thriving market. So this is a massive launch for me. I do feel finally like I'm being read for the first time since maybe the Harbinger days, even though I put out
Hmm.
a lot of work
Yeah.
since
Yeah.
then. And maybe an argument could be made, and Bad Idea would certainly make this argument, that their maneuvering and manipulation of the market and very smart marketing acumen, and that they were constantly getting people to talk about the publisher, and they maybe not
That's
about
true.
the books, but about the publisher, that the moment they turned around and were like, okay, now we're a publisher for everybody, all that other stuff is behind us. We did what we had to do to establish our brand, and now we're just making books, and you can get them from Lunar and everybody can read
Hmm.
them. And it was kind of an elastic snap back,
Hmm.
where instead of struggling for sales like an amazing publisher like Mad Cave has to, or something, you got this boom. And so, on the one hand, it does sometimes feel like it's at the cost of that previous work. I hold out and hope that someday that work will be available as trades and will be universally available. I'm proud of that
Yeah.
work. I think I would be remiss to say that the successful launch of the HAB doesn't have something to do with some very smart, mischievous
Okay.
marketing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
yeah. And I also want to give a shout out Sienna Fallon, our marketing person.
Hmm.
They haven't been with us always, but they are a noticeable boom for us. Like they're incredible. So that's part of it too.
Fair enough. In the 2020 interview, you had mentioned it's basically like family, right?
Yeah,
Like,
for better or for worse.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You can love your family, but every once in a while you want to strangle them. But that doesn't mean
Hmm.
that there's not still some connection. And they're doing right by you by getting David Lapham and Bill Sienkiewicz and all the rest of these creators, and Simon Bowland as a letterer. I don't think I mentioned him before, so I think that's the whole
Oh
creative
yeah,
team.
we definitely have to talk about Simon's work on this
Yeah.
book, especially because it's not an easy book to letter. I think there's more post production on this book than we've only on finished issue 2. I'm full post. The books are done,
Mhm.
guys. But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the final touches. This might be the most intensive. And, that falls on the letterers. They're the last line of defense between you and your reader, right? Last ones that are going to touch those pages. This book has a lot of internal things going on in the characters that I'm trying to externalize in a way that aren't obvious, but that the reader still picks up, right? Which is a difficult line to walk in. And so part of that is really fine tuning the dialogue so that one word can mean something. If you're a really astute enough reader, or a careful enough reader or whatever, that falls on Simon, and Simon does amazing work. He does fantastic sound effects too, by the way. You're hard pressed to figure out what sound effects are drawn on the page by David and what are done by Simon, which is a very rare thing from a letterer.
Yeah. This is a thread that I've had in other episodes recently. Writers using a lettering pass as definitely as like another round of editing on their script. Right. So I've talked to a couple of letterers recently, and like they building in more time in that lettering pass, knowing that the writer is going to, I have, now that I'm seeing it and now that I'm doing all that thing, I have this different idea. I can't think of a writer that I've talked to that hasn't mentioned that as like part of their process. How early into your writing career did you realize that that's really important?
I'm going to answer your question, but before that, I want to say the letterer is also can very easily become the most abused member of your team. The entire industry-wide standard is to underpay them. When I first came into comics, Richard Starkings and Comicraft were lettering the Wildstorm books, and I was very close friends with Bill O'Neill. P.S. Not the Bill O'Neill who drew my very first comic book, a different Bill O'Neill in comics who was a letterer. I was friends with both of them. And I saw Bill O'Neill getting paid obscene amounts of money to letter like Planetary, right? Or The Authority. And if you'll remember The Authority, you'll have pages that has 1 or 2 or 3 balloons. I mean, it was Ellis at his most concise, right? And he was getting obscene amounts of money. Those days are gone. And no one is as underpaid in comics as the letterer. I would say the second most underpaid person is the writer, but the letterer is more underpaid than anybody. And if ever I'm involved, we pay our letterers more because it's egregious what they're paid. Secondly, you have to be careful with their time because they get paid less. They also have to really slam a bunch of books. So my process with the letterer is I get the pages and then I do my very, very best to rewrite the text of my scripts to match how the art eventually came across the finish line. Because there's a lot of places where the artist is going to have done a phenomenal job with acting. And you're like, I don't need all this dialogue. I was just thinking it through on the page, but now I see the art and I don't need this. And there will be a few places where some of the storytelling became muddled or you weren't communicative enough in the script and you need to fix it with text and you need to solve the problems with text. So that's inevitable. That's going to happen. Then it goes to the letterer only after you've done your very best to try to really clean it up. And then the letterer there'll be some mistakes that the letterer makes because they're moving fast very often because of deadlines and you're under the gun. And like I said, they're the last person to be in the production line. And then to your point, to getting to your question, and then you're going to look at it now for the first time, you have every asset at your disposal. It's theoretically colored at this point. You definitely have the art. You definitely have the lettering on top of the art. And now you can really start to look at it as a page, as a work of design, right? How much is too much text? What sentiments do we need or not need? Can we pull this back? Do we move this over here? Does this sting better when it's on this face? And you really start crafting the comic book for the first time. Everything else was just collecting assets. If you skip that process, and again, letterers are underpaid, right? So it's a struggle to ask them to do this. But if you skip that process, you are definitely skipping out on making the very best comic book you can be. Now, having said that, I am a big believer in post-production once you get all the assets. That idea is 20, 30, 40% more of a believer in it than I am. So that's another reason why we really try to pay the letterer more than they would get anywhere else, because it can be very taxing. It's taxing on me. And I don't, I can very often, I can be like, ugh, really? Isn't this good enough? But I think your question was, and I'm sorry for belaboring it so much, but like I
No,
think
no.
your question, when did I realize that we needed that sort of post-production, right? And
Sure.
I'll tell you, that's from the very, very beginning. When you write your first comic book and you're not the artist,
Mhm.
that's a different experience, an experience I envy intensely, but I'm not the artist. So when you write your first comic book and another artist draws it, and then another letters it, and you get it, it's horrifying. First of all, it's your first comic, so it sucks. Basically,
Yeah.
it's always gonna suck.
Yeah.
It's a sliding scale. Some people's first comic sucks less than others, but it's always gonna suck.
Yeah.
And two, you begin to realize, like, I thought I was visualizing the comic book, but there was all these other voices I had not taken into account: the artist, the colorist,
Mhm.
for instance, if your comic isn't black and white. And the letterer has a voice too, a visual graphic design voice on the page.
Mhm.
And I wasn't taking those voices into account, and now we really need to triage this. And early in my career, I worked for companies that literally just boom, 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 boom. The process, you turn in the script, artist turns in the thing, the letterer does the deal. You never get to look at it again. It goes out in the world. You don't see it until you have it in your hands. Chaos
Right.
Comics was like that when I worked with Chaos Comics. And that's when you realize, like, oh, this is not a finished comic book. This is
Mhm.
everybody's first pass, basically. And it
Mhm.
makes this thing that isn't nearly as finessed. It's just not as sharp as it could be. And in fact, I just read a comic from a major publisher. I'm not going to mention any names or
Yeah. Yeah.
anything. And like panel 1, balloon 1, typo. Like you open the comic, you read the
Yeah.
first balloon, and there's a big old glaring typo. And it's like, you guys are moving
Fuck.
too fast. You're not
Yeah.
paying attention. I get that you got deadlines. I get that you're trying to make as many books as you can, but like, that's what we want to avoid. And that's the
Yeah.
most egregious example. I'm trying to
Right.
finesse subtext. I'm not
Yeah.
even, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If a typo gets in, then you're like, God damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different levels and layers of things. And especially like when you're doing something for print, as soon as you sign off on it, the stuff just appears. It just,
Yeah. I have also struggled all my life with a learning disability, which we don't have to talk about here. But
Mhm.
what it does mean is that I'm a typo terrorist. If
Yeah.
I had been born in the era of the typewriter and had to be a writer, forget about it. It would have never
Screwed.
happened. I'd be digging ditches for the rest of my life. It's
Yeah.
because of the word processor that I can
Yeah.
even work in this industry. So
Yeah.
needs to be an extra
Yeah.
an extra line of defense between me and the world.
Yeah. That's why we have editors. That's why we have other
Yes.
people looking at
God.
things. That's why you have Simon, who is also, of course, a 2000 AD alum. I can't
He's
let
so
that go
good.
without giving a shout out to them.
And-
Okay, so we've somehow managed to get 30 some minutes into this chat without actually giving the pitch for the HAB. You had said in our last conversation, elevator pitches aren't necessarily your best quality.
Yeah.
Can you give us the pitch for the HAB?
I can. And then I will explain why it's not the right pitch for the HAB.
Okay.
It's the end of the world. There's been a full-scale thermonuclear exchange.
Mhm.
As far as we, the reader, know, the only survivors we're aware of is a billionaire, his immediate staff, and his immediate family. And they retreat to a $20 billion high-tech bunker that he built 10 years prior to generationally live out and eventually theoretically repopulate the world at some point. So the bunker
Mhm.
has everything they need to live underground a long, good life. But what they discover is that there is something more terrifying waiting for them in the bunker than the ravaged horrors of the surface above. And my tagline is, what if everyone you ever hurt was waiting for you in the last safe place on earth? It's
That's
good,
pretty
right?
good. That's pretty good.
It's good.
That's pretty
Now,
good. Okay.
the truth is that's literally just for issue 1.
Okay.
But it's
Well, that's the
like
issue I read. So
yeah, exactly. And it makes sense for issue 1.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
after that, it gets a little murky. But I just need to get you in the door. What's a pitch? What's a pitch? A
Yeah,
rose
and
is a rose by any other name.
Yeah, that's a good one because that is exactly what we have here in issue 1. Now I'm going into like my HAB questions here. Is horror the most practical genre right now? In sense of
Whoa, that's a
sense of
good.
being like additive to a reader's sense of the world that they're in, or like the least escapist genre, like horror.
There is a theory that, and it was certainly borne out throughout the 80s, that in conservative administrations, horror thrives, right?
Mm,
That's when it's at its most commercially viable, most market share. So I'm always hesitant to assign one genre more importance than another. I think the delivery mechanism is not the truth,
mhm,
right? But nonetheless, there is something about times that feature what I would characterize as rising authoritarianism, democratic sentiment,
mhm.
disinformation, a siloing into more and more isolated social groups. I think all that definitely lends
Mhm.
itself to horror. Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to say it's the most important, or I forget what the exact language you used was.
Practical.
Yeah,
I
most
think
most.
like the
I
least
mean,
sort
it's
of
yeah.
escapist. It's like, no, this is turning into it. This is helping you,
Yeah, I
I
think
guess
so,
maybe.
especially when you look at, like, I love science fiction, and it's becoming increasingly more and more difficult to tell science fiction stories
Mhm,
because those of us who dabbled in hope and wonder and, for lack of a better term, utopianism, we
yeah.
are feeling like we're on our back heels right now or against the ropes, right? And so now it's all dystopian narratives if you're gonna deal in science fiction, and dystopian narratives are kinda boring, and they kinda
Mhm,
suck, and they've been played. But now maybe we're realizing that they were played out because they were very popular in the 50s, right? After World
mhm,
War II, that's after the rise of authoritarianism. Dystopian narratives were very popular in the 20s. Well, that's when Mussolini was inventing this new way to take over democracies. And Hitler was
mhm,
like, that's a good idea. And it was going on in Asia as well. So I think maybe it was very much born of my era of being like raised in the 70s where I like popped out a utopianist when it came to science fiction. And now it's
mhm,
very difficult to tell utopian science fiction stories. So
mhm,
I do think horror is a fast, easy, so to your point, the most pragmatic, the fast, easy way to get right at the pith of what everyone is experiencing right now, which we are horrified by the state of the
mhm,
world. We're horrified by the state of nature, and we're horrified by the state of our government and our representation. Most of
mhm,
us.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Not
I
all
mean,
of
I
us,
don't
but
mean
an
to, yeah,
increasing amount,
to
hopefully,
project.
of us are like,
I
no,
mean,
this is bullshit. Yeah.
yeah, but even if you identify as of a conservative bent, let's say you're still part of the whatever 40, 30% or whatever that still thinks that Trump is doing a great job,
Mhm.
you're still horrified by something, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, yeah,
Everybody is
yeah.
horrified by something, whether it's something legit or something that they've been mobilized to be horrified by.
Mhm.
Everyone's horrified by something right now.
In terms of telling a horror narrative, what does comics give you that prose doesn't? And what does prose give you that comics don't? What was it where you're like, Brood X allows you to tell a horror story that lets you do X versus something you can't do in comics? Like, is
Yeah.
having the reader have to come up with all the imagery, is that a tool that you can use?
Well, 100%. First of all, it's not just the difference between a visual medium and the prose medium, which I would argue like a medium of the imagination, where
Mhm, mhm.
you're constructing the images based
Right.
on the word choices that I give you. It's not just that separation. It is that in prose, you're allowed more time, you're allowed a
Mhm,
different sense of pacing, more space, and you can be less traditional. These are things that are tied to marketing and all this other stuff. I mean, obviously, prose, you can luxuriate a little bit, you can relax and tell your story in your time, at your momentum. Whereas comics, every page costs a certain amount of money, which is
mhm,
not necessarily true of prose. But in
mhm,
comics, every page costs a certain amount of money. You need to be terse, you need to be concise, you need to get in and get out. And that can really dictate your pacing, right? How you parse out the horror. So that's the first thing that's very different. The second thing is, I don't think one is better than the other, but
mhm,
obviously in comics, you show a visceral image if you want. I mean, you can go old horror expressionist, off panel, etc. But
mhm.
for instance, in the HAB, we go visceral. Like you see somebody's, for lack of a spoiler or whatever, you see somebody plasma drill another person's face, right? And
That's
David
right, we
Lapham has
do.
to draw that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And in
yeah.
my research, I discovered that a plasma drill doesn't cut through flesh and bone. So you just sort of melt under the heat. So we show that. In prose, I am going to labor out, hopefully, if all goes well, the right words to invoke that emotional sense, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one is not better than the other. I think they both hit the reader in a certain way, but they're definitely different attacks on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think because I'm not an artist and because I'm a writer, I believe that the prose is a much more direct way for me to put an image into the reader's brain. Because in the comics, in this instance, the HAB, I'm using prose to inspire David, who is then going to put the image in your brain. So that's going to go
Right.
through all the filters. That's David Lapham. And we all have different influences and we all have different ways of expressing ourselves. So for me, if you could tell me that you can make a living writing prose from this point forward, I might consider it and occasionally come back to comics because, that's where I get to really express myself. A quick side note to that about us each having our own influences is David reached out to me when he first read the scripts and he was like, is there any movies or anything that you're using as like a source code? And I had asked him if he'd seen any Lucio Fulci movies that weren't his giallo stuff, but like his straight horror, Fulci straight horror, like The Gates of Hell. His trilogy is a big influence on me. And he said that he hadn't and that he really wasn't a very big horror fan. And he was like, should I go watch them? I was like, no, don't. I can't inflict.
Yeah.
If that's not your bag, you really shouldn't be watching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you're not into it, don't get into it. But that's a perfect example. And in truth, it creates an energy in the book, right? My seeing Fulci's Gates of Hell trilogy far too young and having it like seep down into my soil, and David never having seen it and really being a more traditional Hollywood, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean like great movie, but like the more traditional horror as we saw kind of in the 40s and the 50s. And I think that creates a really bizarre synergy that works great. But that would be the differences. Yeah.
All right. I always find it interesting when I read something, what pops out at me, the little things that sort of stick with me. And there's a line from page, let's say, 6 or 7, somewhere around there, where we're getting the overview of the HAB, right? Like the PR thing of
Is it like the double page splash?
Yes. Bottom sort of right-hand corner of that, you're talking about the lake that the HAB is over, and there's a line that says, talking about Tuttle Barrows, the billionaire, despite being on par with the cleanest water in the world, Tuttle Barrows decided not to profit from it, but selflessly keep it private. Why is that the scariest line in the book? How does that collection of words inform us about Tuttle?
Well, because it's satire, right? Satire is the cleanest, fastest way to let you know who somebody is to slightly exaggerate something. And in fact, we debated altering that line. That's a perfect example of poor Simon being told one thing and then being told another thing in the next moment. So sorry, Simon, I love you. If you're listening to this, you're so good. Because, there were people on our team, and Bad Idea is a very small company. Everyone reads the comic and everyone gets to give notes. And then it sort of filters down to me and Dinesh and I to decide whose notes we're going to take seriously or not. Some members of the team thought that was too on the nose, that it expressed Tuttle too much. And I ultimately was like, it's funny, but not only is it a funny line, but it's what the whole thing is about. It's about greed and selfishness and projecting yourself to be, and it being important to you that you project to others that you're good or a savior, or because of that this is dealing, hopefully not in too obvious a way, like I didn't want to make something that was really on the nose, but like the whole thing is that we're talking about the billionaire class, like we're talking about the class that ostensibly is somehow indirectly or directly involved in this kind of calamitous place that we find ourselves in now, with nature, with politics, with society and culture. And their answer is to go to Mars, right? Their answer is to get the fuck out. But their answer isn't, what can we do to use our technologies and our sciences to fix these problems? Their answer is, how can we make money until the habitat that we all live in, called the world, is completely spent? And then we get to fucking bone off to Mars or go underground or live in a floating platform around the planet, right? So that's the whole point. And I just really felt that even though that line is a little on the nose, it's A, funny, and it's B, like the point. It's
Mhm.
the point. And that ultimately, what we're saying, and it's a bit wish fulfillment, but I also think it's true. What we're saying is that there's going to come a time when you've retreated to your last final place and you've made all the money and you've stripped the planet of all its resources and you've reaped all its consequences and you have everything you could possibly have, and you're still not going to be safe, right?
Yeah.
And everything
Yeah.
you've taken is going to be meaningless. And so I thought that line was a cheeky way to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
It's my
great.
water. It's my clean water.
Yeah. It's such a look into his personality, right? Like, I'm doing something good. I am making this thing that's going to help me and it's going to help my family because I am great. Like, it does a bunch of different things at the same time. And the fact that it's one line at the bottom ish of a double page spread and everything like that, if there's that line in there that does so much, you've got, let's say, 36 pages of comic
Yeah.
built around that. Holy shit, there's a lot of gems there to be had, both at the macro level, just from looking at the pages, and the micro level of, I like that line. I like the way that line.
Yeah.
Like that line,
And it's
the way
so
that line goes.
interesting because, like I said, it was something we had a debate in company, right? Like,
Mm.
are we going to be this goofy?
Yeah.
and it was on me.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I decided we were going to be that goofy, and
Yeah.
I think it does a lot.
Because it's also given in sort of a PR type of
Yes.
context. We're so used to that sort of over the top, glorious leader PR sort of
Yes.
stuff. Like, it fits exactly into that spot.
Yes.
That's so good.
It is
That's
so
good.
North Korean, really. It's kind of
Yeah. So, you've written Swamp Thing. The idea of a industrialist trapped inside their technological home and being chased by a natural enemy is very anatomy lesson. And I am here for
I
it.
never even thought about that. Awesome.
That's
so great.
I don't need to know how things work. I just need to know I press this button and this thing happens. And I press this and this,
Yep.
that. The button do all the thing. I don't need any of that. And then turns out he does. And
Yeah.
oh God, it's so good. I don't say that in a way of like you ripped off Alan Moore for the anatomy lesson, but it's very in that wheelhouse. And it gets to, I'm assuming, part of the thrill of doing this type of book where you've got people who you just want to see brought down. And
Right.
in that issue, Sunderland, the millionaire, whatever in question, even just in that issue, he is so arrogant and he's so ready to get that type of comeuppance when it finally happens. It's a very cathartic sort of thing, which I'm assuming is also part of horror, that catharsis. So reading the issue, there are people in here who absolutely deserve that type of Swamp Thing end. There are also people that don't really deserve that. When you're building the book, do you as a writer feel like you have to have some people in there who are going to make this horror experience not as cathartic as people would like it to be? Like, it's not 100% catharsis. Here is a group of people, the leader of which is a complete shit, but there are some people in there who are just there doing their jobs. They don't subscribe to the mania of their leader. They're just there because that was the best of a horrible situation because the world has blown up around them. So they've now retreated to this. You're the type of writer that doesn't let anybody have easy answers to their stuff. So I'm assuming that was part of your calculus, to have some counterweight so it's not just David Lapham drawing 36 pages of billionaires getting laser, plasma torched in the face, as cathartic as that could be. Yeah. That's the variant issue that's coming out. But in terms of what we got, we see Tuttle, but we also see Tuttle's family, his daughter, his second wife, and we see various people of his staff, varying degrees of quote unquote complicit or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing in this book and also kind of in my work as a whole. A few things. First of all, a complete wish fulfillment isn't horror, even if it's dressed in the clothes of horror. When you have a bunch of dickheads go into a place and be punished for being dickheads, it's not really very interesting. Or I mean, maybe it's fun. It can be fun. You can have like cool kills and stuff, but it's not going to have, I don't think, some emotional resonance. I think horror is most resonant when a perfectly flawed but decent human being ends up in a situation that they really don't deserve. Their punishment is far beyond whatever initial crime triggered the horror, right? So that's one. And two, I think wish fulfillment is so treacly. and very, very, very rarely done well. It's not something that I have a talent for doing. And so I very often am using my writing. I know that ostensibly I'm getting paid to do this. I know that there's an audience that's reading this work, and I'm supposed to be doing some sort of audience service, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really, what's happening here is I'm doing the best I can to survive in a market and write for myself, which are two competing and opposing ideas. What I do when I write, primarily at the core of it, or at least at the initial stage of any project, is I am trying to discover what I think about the world through my own writing process. It's a kind of therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be good therapy if I'm just fucking hacking up people I don't like. I'm creating
Mm-hmm.
straw men and fantasizing like that wouldn't make me a good person. It wouldn't make me
Mm-hmm.
a good writer. So one of my big problems working in comics is I have such a hard time writing the pure villain. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
tried a few times, but usually I sit down at the start of the process and I'm like, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to write a pure villain. He's just a villain, just a mustache twirling villain. But it's very rare for me, and it's very hard because I find myself humanizing every single character. And I may even humanize my fictional characters more than I humanize the people I meet in my life, which is, not cool of me. but
Yeah.
I'm very much interested in that. And so even Tuttle, who is a pompous, obnoxious asshole, my intention is even to humanize him, right? I mean, maybe people don't see it. Maybe they don't. I'm not trying to make him too cartoonish and
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. He's like a dude and he's in this situation, and he's not talentless. He's not stupid, but he is selfish. But the next thing I'll say is that really every character in this, except for maybe Mel, who is the most like bitchy on the surface, every
Mm-hmm.
character in this is kind of a bad person. They
Okay.
really did choose to work for the wealth class, and they really did choose money over whatever else they could possibly have chosen. Tia, the cook, who's very kind in the book, she's not down there with her husband or her children or her family, right? Nobody knew it was going to get to this point. I don't think there's
Mm-hmm.
nobody down here who thought I'm going to angle so that I can be in the bunker at the end of the world. But they
Mm-hmm.
all throughout their lives made choices where they abandoned the working class so that they could be a part of the wealth class. They all chose a money path, right? Otherwise, you don't get to be in this circle with this billionaire. I don't want to go into it here, but I've got famous friends and all this stuff, and was in close proximity to a very well-known billionaire. And I chose to extract myself as I saw that group rising. I chose to extract myself from that. And to this day, I struggle to pay my HOA, and I only have healthcare because of my wife. But I made a choice to value the working caste over this other thing. So they really are all bad people. And the only person you really have sympathy for in the end is Mel, because
Mhm.
Mel didn't choose this. She was born into it, right? And she's
Right.
selfish and self-absorbed, but it's, she was raised that way. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think they're all, I love a lot of these characters. I love Mina Cow, the second wife. I think she's so interesting and layered, and I'm really enjoyed writing her. Issue 2 is going to really reveal how cool Dr. Faruqi is, the Pakistani doctor, the personal family doctor. He's a real science hero, but they made their choices, man. They didn't know it was going to get to this point, but we make choices every day about who we work for, who we fraternize with, what we do with our lives.
Yeah. I'm reading the book. My brain is somehow putting Tuttle on this continuum between your Harbinger work, Peter Stanchek on one hand, and then Toyo Harada on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know where he would necessarily go, but I was thinking about it in terms of money being power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Tuttle's financial power in some way corresponds, at least in my head, the mental power of Stanchek and Harada. Stanchek used his power. And it's been a while since I've read the Harbinger stuff, so correct me if I'm wrong, but he knew he had the power. He used it selfishly, went too far, and then he's like, oh shit, that's not good. I can't do that. That is not.
I have to become a better person.
I have to become a better person. And Harada was like, I understand I have this power and I need to use it to make the world a better place. The ends will justify my means. He is closer to Tuttle than Peter,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. And there's an interesting thing about fiction in that in fiction we can see people's motivations, and it can trick us into being able to assigning things to people that we can't do in real life because we don't know what's going on in
Yeah.
people's heads. So then Tuttle is further on that, where like he has this money being power, but he doesn't have. He thinks he has Harada's vision, but it's all
Yeah.
selfish,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have Peter's self-awareness, so he is powerful but empty,
Yeah.
and you can have that in a humanized version of him. They can have a reason for something, and that reason can be flawed, and maybe even
Mm-hmm.
something that we see at the end of the issue in that flashback. He takes something very personally. This thing has been taken out of my hands that is mine for reasons that I think are bullshit, and I
Mm-hmm.
will not stand for it. Thinking about your work, because you keep coming back to this type of
Mm-hmm.
character, you're marking on the line where empathy and power come together at this point, and that's where Peter would go. But Harada maybe at a different point, but then way over on this other side is Tuttle. That's do not go into that area.
I
Thinking about.
think, well, first of all, my exercise always with Peter and Harada was always that exactly what you said. Peter was a young person who didn't understand power and had not been taught a moral value system, and he did a horrible, horrible thing, and he dedicated himself to being a good person from that point forward. Harada was a good person who thought about the moral structure and value system of the entire world and all of society, and realized that with his power came deep responsibility, and then he proceeded to do horrible things for the rest of his life, right? And that was always how I approached those characters. That was like my very clear thing, right? Is that
Mhm.
one is a bad person who's going to become a good person, and one is a good person who's going to become a bad person, and they're going to collide. I don't think I could write Harada right now, because
Okay.
more than ever, and it was true then too, and it was either being naive or just having a laugh, but more than ever, the billionaire class has proven itself to be solely concerned, no matter what their rhetoric, with
Mhm.
increasing their wealth. And that the idea that you could have somebody, I mean, Harada's a special example that can only exist in fiction because his power was not attached to wealth. He
Mhm.
literally had power, right? It's a
Right.
power fantasy, and he acquired wealth through power. Whereas these people acquire power through wealth, and they're preternaturally good at expanding their wealth. They're wealth hoarders. They have a pathology about
Mhm.
acquiring wealth. And now we realize, now that we've seen the cyclical degradation of democracy in the last decade or more, what we see is we saw them move from saying that capitalism and democracy were inextricably linked, even though anyone who looked at the rest of the world could see that capitalism very often was the tool of the oppressor
Mhm.
and the authoritarian. But here in America, we really labored under it, and it was really pushed on us by the wealth caste that capitalism and democracy are linked, and that you must have a democratic free society or capitalism will not thrive, right? And that these two things are intractable. And then suddenly moved into the dark side of the cyclical play in which authoritarianism began to rise again. And the wealth caste, instead of being like, oh, no, 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 this is going to harm our economics, it's going to harm our capitalism, it's going to harm our freedoms. Instead, what they did was completely get on board,
Mhm. Mhm.
completely get on
Yeah.
board. They
Yeah.
were like, okay, cool. This is even better for us. Now we can do backroom deals. Now we
Right.
can, right? So it turned out that they will follow any ism, any rhetoric, anything to build their wealth base even more. No money is too much. No action is too insincere. No anything, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we know about billionaires now. And it's very hard in that climate to write Toyo Harada.
Mm.
And that is who I am modeling Tuttle on. And I don't mean this in any way. This is not a comment on neurodivergence, but he's
Mhm.
definitely a neurodivergent person. I would argue he has like inherent sociopathy, and this has allowed him to take wealth that, we learn in the first issue. And it's just a side note, but if anyone's paying attention, they know that he is the son of a rubber baron from Indonesia, from colonial times, or he's the grandson of a rubber baron. So he took family wealth and he made it bigger. He's got a preternatural ability. You could call that intelligence. I don't think there is such a thing as intelligence without empathy, compassion, and emotional awareness. But other people do think that is the definition of intelligence. So you could call it that. But that's who Tuttle is, right? I can no longer traffic in the fantasy superhero billionaire, right? Even though I tried to complicate it. It's, Harada's not Batman or whatever. So yeah, that's where Tuttle comes from.
All right.
Sorry.
No.
The podcast's so long. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm a gambler.
That I asked the question. I wanted the answer. That is a great answer. I'm just trying to make sure I cover everything. Okay, so 5 issues. First one is out. The second one is out by the time this will air. What do we have to look forward to over the next 4 that you can tease us with?
I don't even know if it's going to be 4 issues at this point.
The remaining issues.
I probably should have mentioned that. Yeah, over the series.
Yes,
over the life of the series, whatever that will be. My hope is that I'm always turning to the left when you're expecting a turn to the right. This is an act of pure maximalism. I know that a lot of times we end up discussing, and not just you, but every time I'm on a podcast and I end up discussing like the heady aspects of it, like, what I'm trying to say and where my characters are and all this stuff. But truly, the reason why I work in genre is because I'm also love to have fun, right? And the child in me is being served by writing this project because I grew up during the 1980s VHS horror boom. And before there was a Blockbuster, because I'm old enough to have lived through the mom and pop VHS era, I rode my bike to the little VHS hut down the street every single day after school and rented in alphabetical order the horror movie, right? And there was a 16-year-old stoner who didn't care that I was 13, 12, whatever. He would let me watch Cannibal Holocaust. He didn't care. He didn't even know. I don't even think it crossed his mind, right? What I was taking. And this book is an attempt to be every single horror movie I've ever loved, packed into this quivering, dense thing. So it's cosmic horror, it's body horror, it's psychological horror, it's characterological horror, it's we're all stuck in a room together horror. It's, you know what I mean? Like, I guess that's called contained horror. So in that regard, it's very, very dense. And I can see somebody down the line is going to be like, oh, this book wants to be like all things or whatever. And it does, dude. And if you don't dig it, you don't dig it. I get it. It is meant to be maximalist and it is meant to be overindulgent. It's also meant to deal with a lot of the things that are always on my mind because that's just how I don't know how else you write. I don't know how other people write, but that's how I write. So I'm hoping that I have seen some, not much, the book has been very well received, but I have seen some criticism online about like, oh, it's just going to be like Lord of the Flies. They're all high in a bunker and they're all going to start tearing each other apart and all this stuff. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
Well, yeah. A, what's wrong with that? But B, I think people who have read my work are aware that I work really hard to make sure every single issue has its own unique voice, does its own unique thing, and moves in its own direction and does something new to the story, hopefully, and it expresses a new kind of horror genre. And it's something we could only do in comics. It's something that's hopefully what one can expect.
Yeah, I think the response to some of that criticism is there's something for everybody. It wants to try to be all these different things. Like, man, there's something for everybody. Right. Everybody, come on in. The water's fine. And when you've got Lapham and Sienkiewicz on this, like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's going to look great. And be
told well. And you know what I mean? Be told clearly. Be told like.
Yeah, when I was reading the first issue, I was getting real John Carpenter, Dean Cundy, sort of like early, very clean, precise, but then even putting it on the paper that you guys are using, it's got a little bit of that almost film grain, whatever.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it's definitely like a nostalgia vibe too. Yeah.
And we've got at least 4 more issues of it coming. So many times we hear about stuff that gets cut off too early or whatever. Not this book. So
we're definitely gonna. I think maybe one could argue that there will end up being some filler, but you're definitely not getting less.
So a little bit of a home stretch here. I got 2 more questions for you. The first one is I wanted to touch base on something that we had talked about in the 2020 interview. Your work with Comics for Peace, really going through some hard times in the first Trump administration. Is there a silver lining to that in 2026 or?
Well, I mean, the silver lining is that we did what we did. You know, we published a lot of Pakistani artists just to catch people up who maybe haven't listened to the other interview. I worked with some wonderful people from Pakistan to do a college tour and then take in submissions from artists all over Pakistan, young people, so they could tell their stories in comic book form. And then we published a bunch of comics by them. And then we brought 2 of them to San Diego Comic-Con. Maybe 2018. I don't recall. I'm not sure entirely. And we gave away thousands of free comic books filled with young Pakistani artists telling stories the way they wanted to tell them. And the hope and the intention of that program was that they would then go back to Pakistan and then they would continue to nurture the next phase and bring in the next phase. And that me as like the white mentor, that would be where not my involvement ended. I would still very much be involved, but I would no longer be, it would be them, it'd be Pakistanis, choosing Pakistani stories. And it was that even in the beginning, because I had my partners. We took a big hit with the first Trump administration when he gutted the State Department, and that program ended. Now, of course, we are in a much, much worse place with the State Department, with foreign aid. All that was like funding that we were relying on. So, or at least my involvement in that project no longer exists. And I think that project's relationship to the West, that is, which, its intention was to bring voices from South Asia to the West, that is also no longer part of the program, if the program exists at all. I do still know my partners in that, and I'm still friends with them, and I would love to keep doing something with them. I think they're lovely, amazing, wonderful people, but funding is not non-existent currently.
Okay, well, we have an election coming up soon. Hopefully, we can get some people. If for no other reason than for this, we can get a change of change of management.
I think that a lot of harm and damage has been done. It takes a moment to burn down a house, and it takes a year to rebuild it. So I think, as a metaphor, I don't know how long it will take to get the State Department and USAID and everything back to where it was, and we may never. So I think irreparable harm has been done here. I mean, certainly I'm not trying to discourage anyone from trying to make the world a better place, particularly through the democratic process, but not just in regards to my project, but so much harm has been done that will take decades to repair, if ever.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. No. I should have thought of a better transition out of that, because I kind of knew what the answer was going to be.
Okay.
But I'm like, all right, well,
there's that.
We're talking about horror books and, horror in fiction and horror in real life. And,
yeah, exactly.
Never the twain shall meet. They walk hand in hand. Okay.
Yeah.
So at the end of the last conversation, I recently picked up the Criterion Police Story 2 set, and I watched Police Story, and obviously I'd seen Jackie Chan movies before, but I was like, holy shit, this is really, really good. So we ended on a impromptu dissertation on Jackie Chan's, ranked like good entry point Jackie Chan and Hong Kong cinema and stuff. Through complete happenstance, I happen to have just picked up from Arrow Video 4K releases of Hard Boiled and The Killer. So John Woo classics that I have seen, but it has been years. I've been waiting for appropriate releases to come out, and now they have. And I'm like, okay, cool. Can you talk about John Woo at that period, and how would you rank them if somebody were coming into the first time? Is there a particular, like, you should watch this one first or this other one first? Curate / guide me through how I can experience these, and maybe even how can I appreciate these for what they actually are, versus like, oh, this is where that came from, or maybe that's how I should get into it. Basically talk some early 90s John Woo before then.
And late 80s. I mean, the first thing we have to say is the Hong Kong transition, genre-wise, from the entirely wuxia-dominated early 70s to then moving into more what we would call in the West kung fu movies, in wuxia-tinged kung fu for a long time. And then we get into the 80s, and with Jackie Chan, we move into this modern kung fu thriller, Police Story, and there's a lot of this stuff, and it mostly comes from Jackie Chan and his crew, right, who emerge. John Woo, you can see the DNA start in Last Hurrah for Chivalry, which is a John Woo wuxia film, but he starts to get into this love of two things: extreme violence and a profound brotherhood attachment. One could even argue homoerotically tinged men just really having a code and this kind of brotherly love, right? And this didn't start in Hong Kong, but it gets called heroic bloodshed in the West. So Last Hurrah for Chivalry, I think, plants this DNA. But you're right. It's like it's John Woo who really, first of all, we move from martial arts into a lot of gunplay and what would also be called gun fu at this point. I do personally, other than the extraordinary movies we're talking about, for the most part, I do prefer the martial arts films. I think there's something more exciting about seeing a human being physically really push themselves, because it can be boring, right? It can be, it's kind of magic. You either hit the guy or you don't, depending on what the script needs you to do.
Like, how many shots did he do? How did that 9, like Michelle clip, he just shot like 30 shots in that thing. You're like, well, some of them are repeated. And you're like, no, not that much. But anyway.
Yeah, and that's the charm of John Woo, right? Is that people only reload when it looks cool. And he's like, he's
but it does look so cool. You're like,
it's
okay,
so cool.
that was worth
nobody knows what looks cool more than John Woo, right?
Yeah.
And there's lots of places where this starts. You could say the Girls with Guns movies, also from Hong Kong. I would argue those are more martial arts films that happen to have guns. The real heroic bloodshed, gunplay, gun fu, men being brothers, doing men stuff,
lots of screaming.
There's a Johnny Toe film. Is it Exiled? Where they hacky sack with a Red Bull can. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so dude. John Woo really does kick this off. He really does make the best versions of these. If I were to rank them, it's difficult to rank movies in the sense of like, what have you seen more recently? Like, for instance, I just showed Hard Boiled to my wife. Like, she'd never seen it, right? I recall in my heart that I prefer The Killer and Better Tomorrow to Hard Boiled, but I just watched Hard Boiled 3 weeks ago. So that hospital sequence is in my brain, and and I say hospital sequence, it's like the entire last act of the movie. So it's very hard to rank, but in my heart, I would say it's Killer, Better Tomorrow, Hard Boiled, and then Bullet to the Head. And you should also watch Last Hurrah for Chivalry just to see how John Woo evolved into that spot. I love Bullet to the Head, but I think that Bullet to the Head it's so interesting. It's like he's like really trying to be political, which there's like nothing John Woo can't make opera out of. You know what I'm saying? Like, he just can't. There's no political nuance or anything. But I really love Bullet to the Head. It's scrappy. I just hesitate to recommend it because I feel like you have to be kind of deeper into the John Woo hole before you appreciate what Bullet to the Head is doing. It does remind me of what was this? The Shu Hart film, the early one that I love so much. That's not heroic bloodshed, but I really love it. Oh, fuck. Name escapes me. So never mind. But then, and then you have like Ringo Lam appears on the scene, like City of Fire, Full Contact. I don't think Full Contact's all that good, but City of Fire is really cool. But then you just kind of get these like greats who were really profoundly influential in the kung fu genre. They all kind of hop on the heroic bloodshed bandwagon at that time, and they make some good movies. Ronnie Liu makes a bunch of heroic bloodshed. They're okay. I'm not the biggest Ronnie Liu fan, but you get like masters. Lau Kar Lung, who is huge, who makes like 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. These are kung fu movies, not heroic bloodshed. This is a lot. I'm just realizing I'm dumping a massive amount.
No. It's all good. It's all good. Sorry. People can come back and pick through this.
Lau Kar Lung is a massive influence on kung fu movies and wuxia kung fu in particular. And he makes 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. He makes 36 Chambers. He's really huge. He makes Tiger on the Beat. He makes some other the Tiger films. That was like a long running series. Um, Ewan Peng, who I think is
Mhm.
maybe the greatest action director of all time.
Mhm.
He makes Tiger Cage, which is pretty interesting and okay. I mean, I would think he also makes my absolute favorite kung fu movie of all time, which doesn't mean it's the best movie of all time, but when it comes
Right.
to kung fu fighting, called In the Line of Duty 4. And then Johnny Toe, again, Exiled and A Hero Never Dies and all that stuff, right? But Wu is definitely the one who brings heroic bloodshed, and it takes him to the West. You know what I mean? Like, it's like so popular. And so that's the second thing to talk about, is how this subgenre of action films changed global action
Mhm.
forever. And we see Hong Kong having a profound influence on action cinema going back to the 70s. Once the kung fu films start coming to the West, particularly to the United States, they have a profound impact in African American communities, where there's a bunch of old theaters left behind from white flight.
Mhm.
And these people who own these theaters, this is also, by the way, it kind of arrives at the same time that the misnamed black exploitation movement arrives, because they had to pack these old theaters and they were now in black neighborhoods. And so movies for black audiences began to appear. But on top of American cinema being made by black artists, or by often Jewish artists who were employing black artists, you also have a massive surge in kung fu films, because African American audiences liked seeing people of color beat the shit out of very often white
Yeah.
colonialists.
Yeah, yeah.
So they really went over well. And that's how we end up with the Wu-Tang Clan and rank and all this stuff, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
a massive influence in the African American culture. So already Hong Kong action films are starting to infect Hollywood action films. And you kind of see that when Hollywood tries to get into the Bruce Lee game, right? Like, that's kind of when it starts. But nothing changes global action more than John Woo. When John Woo starts dropping these heroic bloodshed movies, the entire idea of what an action movie is supposed to be changes. The form of it changes, the themes of it change, and the cartoonish expression of it. Because one thing that has always kind of separated Asian genre cinema in Western genre cinema is that Western genre cinema was always, and still to a certain degree, locked in realism. In Asian genre cinema has a complete disregard for realism. There is just
Mhm.
no interest in it, right? Like, violence isn't cool, so why couch it in reality, right? And I think we don't end up now with a lot of movies that suck, like a lot of action films that are over the top and too much here in the West, and that Hollywood comes out with, and that where you're just like, roll your eyes. That's all because they did it so well in Hong Kong.
Mhm.
But you see it transform in the 80s. Indonesian action films, Indian action films, all the biggest markets in the world are immediately respond to John Woo's first few heroic bloodshed movies. Particularly, I think Hard Boiled. Hard Boiled is kind of the heroic bloodshed film heard around the world.
Mm. It I
Much. I
No, no,
just
no,
said
no,
so many.
it's fantastic. I mean, I think maybe something I want your opinion on, because I think I know the answer to this question, but why does Broken Arrow not match up to Hard Boiled? Why does Hard Target not match up to Hard Boiled? What is it about him working in a different system that makes it not able for him to replicate the Hong Kong stuff with more money and more resources?
So on
Did
this,
I
I can only speculate, because
Right, right,
I'm
right, it's
not
all
as well
speculation.
schooled on the American. I'm less interested in the American action films. But I think, if I were to guess,
Mhm.
Hollywood was an entirely different system than the Hong Kong system. I think I might have my timeline on this. Somebody can correct me if I've got this wrong. When he's making The Killer and Better Tomorrow and ultimately Hard Boiled, it's sort of the end of the dominance of the Hong Kong system. So there was a point at which Hong Kong was the third largest film market on the planet. You had
Mm,
Hollywood, you had Bollywood, and then you had Hong Kong. And that was
mhm,
it. They dominated everything. Granted, in the United States, because we're, xenophobists, we didn't engage with Bollywood as much. We didn't engage with Hong Kong cinema as much. But all over the rest of the world, everybody was watching this stuff. I mean, Jackie Chan was the biggest star on the planet before he was a star in the United States. So that system, when it was firing on all cylinders, when it was the third most popular market on the planet, especially, and also consider the population of Hong Kong, right? I mean, we're talking about like it is much smaller than the United States and than India. I consider so the fact that it's like punching at that weight as far as making money is crazy. So consider that he's in this very small, very successful system, and they are making movies very fast, and they're all sort of working together, and all the big names are kind of like doing it, and studios are fighting each other. It's a very, very dynamic scene, right? Golden Harvest is struggling to survive, and there's like all these new studios coming up, and they're stealing people away, and they're making movies hard, and they're making them fast, and they have very few regulations, which is not cool, but does make for great movies. I don't like to see people get hurt, but if you're getting hurt for my entertainment, I mean, what are you going to do? I'm going to watch it.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch it. Right. But it makes for this very, very aggressively innovative film industry. Here in the United States, at that point, there was much less transition happening, much less competition. You had your big studios. Obviously, they're bringing new talent in, so they obviously feel a need to shake things up or whatever. But it's a little bit more of a staid system. And I think that it's harder for Wu to operate and be passionate in that system. I think there's a lot more regulation. I think there's a lot more people telling him what his scripts can and cannot be. I think there's a lot more of the stars determining what they will and will not do on set. I just think it just seems like a less vibrant film industry at that time, and I think it's harder for him to operate inside of that. I also think he made so much great work in Hong Kong, and that's his culture. You know what I mean? Like, he's culturally attuned to it. I think it's very difficult to go to another culture, especially from east to west, and try to remain culturally attuned. Like, what might look really awesome to him through his cultural lens might look silly to American audiences. And I also, at that same time, I also want to say, I think Hard Target's awesome. I mean, I kind of like some of, especially those early ones. I think there is some John Woo and all that. I just, it's a different system. It's more money. I mean, you kind of nailed it when you said he's got more money and more resources. Yeah, but with, more money, more problems. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. He doesn't have that bad idea family to let him kind of do his thing and keep him relatively within certain parameters, but then just sort of let him go and have, Chow Yun Fat doing the two-fisted guns 5 minutes after he's playing a saxophone at a jazz club and stuff.
And I also wonder how much of it is our own cultural lens. Like, what if he had Van Damme played a saxophone with a blue gel light to jazz and then turned around and blown away people with an automatic rifle? Would American audiences have been like, oh, that is awesome? There's something that another culture allows us a kind of a distance on, that we can see things better than we can with our own culture. Because I think those movies probably are better than they were received at the time. If you just open your heart to them, you know what I mean? Like, Face Off is hilarious. Face Off is awesome. It's great.
True. Yeah.
Cultural lens is a tough thing to see past.
Yeah, that gives me a good starting point to go back and refamiliarize myself with the core John Woo.
And I mean, some of it, when he tries to get serious, it's like his war movie. Or, I mean, a lot of people like the two Red Cliff movies. They're okay. We're kind of in the late artist phase of John Woo, right? Where he's like, you let these guys do whatever they want, and then you give them new technology like CGI or something, and they're just out of control. They just don't.
Well,
overindulgence is a funny thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of overindulgence, I feel like I've taken up more than enough of your Sunday to talk about things, but the HAB #1, really, really good.
Awesome.
I've got it in front of me. I'm looking forward to the next at least 4 issues, the rest of the series. And of course, can't have you on without talking some action cinema. Anything else that you have coming up?
No, I think that idea is going to be publishing Banana #1, which I did with Kevin McGuire.
Oh,
okay. Yep, with a Michael Allred cover.
Nice.
I don't really fully understand how that idea does Like, well, I
You
don't know
just
where
do
my
stuff and give it
comics
to
go.
them, and then they.
Yeah, I make it, and then I'm like, "This is cool. Is anybody gonna read it?" But I think it's actually it was kind of, maybe it was a secret incentive thing for a while that only a few people, but I think they're gonna be releasing it. So that's just like a goofy one shot that I wrote,
Mm.
in an afternoon. But it has amazing art if you don't like the story. And the pitch on that one was I kinda
yeah.
wanted to make, like, what if The Far Side was like a real, like, action comic, was basically my pitch.
Okay. You're getting better at these pitches. 6 years ago, you were like, I don't know. I mean, obviously you can pitch well, but you're like, yeah, pitching isn't necessarily my strong suit. Here, we've heard 2 of them, and I was like, that's a really good pitch. And the second one is like Far Side action comic. You're like, oh shit, yeah, okay, okay.
Awesome.
Watching you get better in real time is nice.
Nice.
Where can people follow you? Like, what's the?
I am currently spend most of my time on Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a terrible place, and I totally understand if you don't want to go there. It is essentially just a left-wing bubble, but I don't know where else to go at this point. So it's my home. So you can come see me there. You could follow me on Facebook, but I really only post like once a month, and it's all promotion. But if you want to talk to me, come see me on Blue Sky or Letterboxd. I don't know if if there's movie lovers out there. I
Speaking
do
of movies,
spend a lot of time on Letterboxd. And I should mention that more. Come see me on Letterboxd. Yeah.
okay. Well, Josh, thank you so much for doing this. I will promise not to have 6 years go by before I have you back, because I've got more movies I need to ask you about.
I love
Like,
it.
hey,
I love it.
Walk me through this. Walk me through that. Put this in context.
After the whatever 32 issues of the HAB come out or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah. Do you want to do like if you want to do a not a deep dive, but like a recap or
Sure, whatever you want. Yeah,
or something.
whatever you. Yeah, if you've got the time, I got the time.
I clearly have the time, man. Time may be a flat circle,
But it's our
super
flat
abundance,
circle.
but it is our flat circle. That's exactly right.
Yep.
So there you have it, folks. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you are given the opportunity to do so, because it really helps us out and we would super appreciate it. So until we meet again, hopefully soon, my name is Greg. Stay safe, keep enjoying those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.